It is August 29th, 2018, and we're continuing with Steve Delia's interviews with poets. Today's poet is Editor-in-Chief of the Schuylkill Valley Journal and Humanities and Poetry Director of the Manayunk Roxborough Art Center, Peter Krok.
Hi, Pete.
Hey, Steve. Good to see you, my friend. It's been a while.
Has been a while.
Yeah.
We go way back. I remember you reading at the Northeast Regional. That's where I met you, but I couldn't remember if you were reading for Emiliano, Martine, or Bob Forster. But that's when I first met you.
I think I was reading for Bob Forster.
Bob actually took it over from Emiliano.
Oh, Bob took it over from Emiliano.
Emiliano was the very first poet I ever met.
Oh, okay. Well then, I wasn't there when Emiliano was running it. In fact, I didn't even know Emiliano at the time. Him and I became very close because we did that program
On Lorca, right?
on Lorca.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that, yes.
Yeah, we did the program on Lorca.
And we'll get into some of your programs a little later. But what I want to start with is, how did you first get into poetry? How old were you, and how did it all start?
I guess I first got into poetry when I was in high school, and I used to like to read poems when I was going to and from school or when I was taking the bus. And I always had to have a book with me. Wherever I went, there had to be a book in my hand. Early on, the book that I liked the most was a book about famous poets. I liked this particular book because it had biographies. If you just have the book with just poems, it just didn't do the same thing for me. So I always had this book with biographies, and so I guess I started, late in high school, but definitely by the time I was in college. And the funny thing is that I didn't take too many poetry classes, and English was not my best major at all. A lot of the stuff was critiquing short stories and all, and that really wasn't what I felt. I was more one of these emotional sort of poets, and that's what struck me the most, emotion. And I was a William Butler Yeats fan, big time. So I guess I started late in high school and a lot when I really started going to college, but not in class. It was something I started just on my own when I was taking the bus. I had to have a book in my hand. Even now, wherever I go, if I go on vacation. In fact, normally I go on vacation, I take too many damn books. And the more books I take, the less likely I am to read them. If I take 2 books, I'm more likely to read 2 books than if I take 6 books. I don't know, it's just the way it works. I wish I could do something about it, but it's a habit of mine to take a lot of books. And I don't need to. But the one thing I do take that is absolutely necessary is I take my computer with me. So we go on vacation, my computer comes along too.
Now, when you say you always had to have a book with you, you're saying that not just poetry, it could be anything, a short story, a novel?
It could be most anything, but on the whole it was poetry. The good thing about poetry was it was a short little thing, It's not, occasionally I may read other things because, you just get into it, so you want to read through. But on the whole, for the most part, basically it was poetry.
Now, it's interesting that you said you needed, or you wanted the bios of the poets too. So it seems like most people, they'll read poems and then they want to know about the poet through the poetry. With you, it seems to be you were either on an even keel or you were backwards.
Well, the interesting thing about this is the biography and the poems were together in the book. So you couldn't avoid reading the biography. It's not like you read a poem and you look for the biography. It was like right there in the book. And so in reading the poem, it was natural, at least it was for me, to read some of the biography. Now, they did have poetry books that just had poems, but they didn't interest me because I liked having the bio with the poet. So if I were to read about Yeats, if I were to read, Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, T.S. Eliot, whatever, Dylan Thomas, I had like a little bio, and it just gave me a better handle on the person. Because I kind of wanted to know the person too, not just the work.
Mm-hmm.
The newer poets, right around Robert Lowell, I knew those kind of poets I was kind of familiar with. But then by the time 1980s and 90s, I wasn't as familiar with those poets, and nor their biographies. And today, I doubt seriously if anybody really pays any attention to biographies. Maybe they do, but Stanley Kunitz. But you could see part of his biography in his poems, where I don't know how much you see biographies in other people's poems.
So you're in high school, you're writing poetry. When did you sort of get out into the circuit and start reading poetry in public and becoming involved in all that?
Well, I guess I started, and this is at the Northeast Regional Library with Sal Leon, who happened to be the director years ago. And he invited me because we had a program on Edgar Allan Poe. And that's where I met Rosemary Capella. And I think it was either 1974 or 1975. It was around that time. And after then, I began to look to read at more venues, but there weren't near as many venues then as we found in the coming years after that. So that was my first place. And then after that, I might go to the one, trying to think, North.
It was the North Star Bar.
Right. And as you said, I mean, that was a tough area back then. So I got involved in reading there, and then I knew people that ran the Painted Bride, so I read there a couple times. I'm talking about now, like the late 70s, maybe the early 80s, but there weren't a lot of venues, at that time.
Did you meet Lou at the Painted Bride, Lou McKee? Because he was very involved with the Bride.
I just don't remember when I met Lou McKee. Well, he went to LaSalle College, I went to LaSalle College, but he graduated 4 years after me. And through him, maybe somehow with the Painted Bride, because when they had a journal, and I was in the journal several times, it may have had something to do, and I'm sure it did, with my connection with Lou McKee. So by that time, by 1998 or 97, I got to know Lou McKee.
Okay, well, you mentioned journal, and that's something that you're very involved with and have been involved now for several years. Let's talk about the Schuylkill Valley Journal and how did that all start, and how much are you involved with it? What do you do as far as getting this publication out?
Well, there's been a development, you might say. There's been a process with the Schuylkill Valley Journal. In 1990, my brother asked me if I wanted to run a literary series. And at the time, I was very shy, and I just felt, uncomfortable running something like that. But then I thought, well, it would be a good experience for me. So in 1990, I started the Humanities series at the Manioc Arts Center. And I started the literary series there. And then a year or two later, Jim Marinell started to come to the reading series. And through that, Jim and I got to know each other. And then the people that appeared in the Schuylkill Valley Journal were the people I brought to give readings at the Manioc Arts Center. So then we got to know each other that way. And then eventually kind of worked it out that the journal would be taken over by the Arts Center. And it would become part of the Arts Center to exhibit the poets, and share the poets. And it became kind of like a helper when it came to financing the thing. So Jim was basically running. I used to help, but then in 9/11 and 2001, Jim died. And the odd thing is it was such a terrible day in our history. But he died because of a failed They tried to have a liver and a kidney transplant at the same time, and it just didn't work. But
Jim was a great guy.
Jim was a great guy. I call him the best editor because he used to read people's work and make comments on them all the time and really have a direct connection with the writer. But then again, the journal at that time was a rather small journal. But he used to have that kind of connection. Well, after he died, the next issue after that was dedicated to him and dedicated to loss. And then I was speaking to his wife, Susie, and it was like, well, Susie, what do we do? And we just got the idea that we would keep the journal going. So then at Jim's memorial service, we asked people to donate whatever they wanted to donate in Jim's memory to donate it to the journal. So that kept the journal alive. At one point I decided that I wanted to have an individual cover. So when people saw it, it had an identity. You know, like so many other covers, I mean, you see them and what separates one cover from another? Well, here's another cover and this has got the Rocky statue. So people can identify this in some way with the Rocky statue. Here's another cover with social consciousness. And I saw this when I was at the art museum, so it was like a plea for this eternal mother to help us. So that's, in a sense, the idea that I had, that we needed, it was like my plea to the world. And so that's how I came up with this cover. And it's a beautiful piece of artwork. And you have this cover and you have two other statues next to it. And in the classical way, one of them represents life and the other one death. But I love this Eternal Mother statue. So that's another feature of the journal. I also had a film critic at one time, and now I have another managing editor. So I've had different managing editors along the way, different poetry editors, and the current one is Bernadette McBride, and she's doing a great job. I now have an online site, and I have somebody who's the managing editor of this and the online site, and that's Mark Danowski. I also have someone who handles the online site, Jordan Heil.
So it's expanded quite a bit since Jim Marino was doing this by himself.
Exactly.
30 years ago.
It's expanded enormously. When he did it, it was a stable bound. Now we've got seamless binding. So that was one of the most dramatic changes. And then later on, what happened was I actually enlarged it, and that happened by kind of like mistake. So years ago, it was this size. If you can see the difference. Mm-hmm. And then and that happened by mistake. And I thought, wow, this is a better idea. And then later on, as I'm moving along, I did more with the nonfiction, and I also made a featured poet. So there's been a real transition within what's going on with the journal. And you asked, what is my role? I'm the editor-in-chief, I'm the fundraiser, I'm the coordinator with everybody else, so I bring everybody together. I work with all the different parts. And you might say I'm
the overseer.
The overseer. I mean the overseer, yes, I'm the overseer. So, and part of the reason why I keep it going is it gives me a chance to work with all kinds of other people. I mean, I like the connections that you get out of something like this. So there's a certain, I mean, someone says that, yeah, it's a labor of love. It's a labor of love, but it's also a labor of love with the people that contribute to it. So it is a hell of a lot of work, but it's nice to have all these connections, you know. In fact, my theme has always been Ian Forster's line, Only Connect. So that's always been my theme for this.